Now every American knows that George Washington was the first president, and probably many have heard that he can't lie. They heard of a cherry tree and perhaps his power on the battlefield. What many people may not know, however, is that Washington was also a former slave owner, and not particularly a repentant one. From the truth behind the myth of the cherry tree to the shocking story of his infamous dentures. These facts about George Washington will change the way you see America's greatest founding father. So here are the good, the bad, and the ugly truth about the founding father. George Washington lived a busy and accomplished life. He was a successful military leader, entrepreneur, and assuming responsibility as the first president of the United States. Nevertheless, he had faced several challenges on his journey, ranging from difficulties in his marriage, sickness, and unsuccessful love affair. One of the persistent myths about George Washington is the anecdote about his honesty and the cherry tree. In this story, a young George allegedly damaged one of his father's cherry trees. When he was arrested, he immediately admitted what he had done, saying, "I can't lie, I cut it with my axe." According to the story, his father proudly told young George that telling the truth is worth more than 1,000 trees. It's a great story, but one that probably never happened. After Washington's death in 1799, the American public was desperate for information about their first president. A bookseller named Mason Locke Weems decided to take advantage of their curiosity. A few months after Washington's death, Weems declared, "Millions are gaping to read something about him. My plan? I give his history. I then go on to show that his unparalleled rise and elevation were due to his great virtues." Accordingly, he published the life of Washington, but did not include the myth of the cherry tree until a few publications later. Although myths about America's first president persist, the real facts about George Washington are fascinating in themselves. For starters, Washington is by far the highest-ranking U.S. military official. His official rank was Grand General. This is even superior to 4- and 5-star champions. He also remained the most formidable enemy the British had ever faced. In 2012, Washington beat Napoleon in a poll that asked the British to rank their greatest enemy commander. However, Washington actually won only 6 of the 16 battles in the Revolutionary War, with the rest lost or neutralized. George Washington may be remembered as a stern-faced founding father from his portraits, but he certainly had a sense of humor. He likes to give his dogs funny names, such as Mrs. Moose. Washington even named one of his dogs Cornwallis, after an English general he defeated in battle. But Washington wasn't always a great general. He was, however, an excellent spy master. Washington struggled mightily to win the Revolutionary War with an army that was perpetually undermanned, undertrained, and undersupplied. So, to triumph over one of the world's most powerful military forces, he relied increasingly on his unseen weapon, a secret intelligence network. Throughout the conflict, Washington's spies helped him make bold, canny decisions that would turn the tide of the conflict, and in some instances, even save his life. The story of Washington's underground spy network and how it helped Americans win their revolution is replete with intrigue. There were letters written in invisible ink, a rare female agent who went by the mysterious moniker Agent 355, an African-American double agent, a patriot tailor who collected dirt while making clothes for British officers, and the gruesome execution of the spy Nathan Hale. According to the CIA, General Washington was more deeply involved in intelligence operations than any American general-in-chief until Dwight Eisenhower during World War II. And now for the dark side of the legendary life of President Washington. While facts about George Washington are often amusing, it is impossible to discuss his life without considering his role as a slave owner. Washington was only 11 years old when he first inherited a slave. His father left 10 slaves for Washington in his will. From there, Washington continued to buy and sell slaves. When it comes to his religious beliefs, Washington is quite ambiguous and hard to read. With very little material to rely upon, historians mostly limit themselves to analyzing what Washington did to try to figure out what he might have believed. The problem is that even his most direct actions sometimes seem contradictory. The first president, for example, encouraged his fellow Americans to come to worship, but sometimes struggled to get to church on his own for weeks. For many years, he served as a dedicated servant and churchgoer, but left services instead of receiving communion. And although there was a mention of providence in his writings, there is relatively little mention of God or Jesus Christ. Another nagging fun fact about George Washington's teeth argues that they're wooden. However, the truth about Washington's dentures is not funny at all. In fact, Washington suffered from dental problems. When he was in his 50s, he only had one tooth left, but Washington's dentures were not wooden. It was a combination of animal bones and human teeth. Sometimes Washington would salvage teeth from his own to use in his dentures, but he often turned to his slaves. Washington's first love was the wife of one of his closest friends. Washington wrote a few weeks before the wedding, "The world doesn't need to know the object of my love and declared like this when I want to hide it." The letter was not addressed to his fiancée, Martha Custis, but to Sally Fairfax, who was married to one of his closest friends and patron, George Fairfax, the son of one of Virginia's largest landowners. Described as an intelligent, black-eyed beauty, Sally befriended Washington when he was still an awkward teenager. Historians credit her for helping soften his rough edges socially, teaching him manners and conversation among the rich and powerful, and even how to dance the minuet. When he married his wife, Martha, she brought with her 84 slaves. George Washington is often praised for freeing his slaves upon his death. However, the truth is much more complicated. In his will, Washington freed his slaves, but he specifically said that they would not be freed until Martha died. Finally, Martha released them about a year later, but not out of her own goodness. Abigail Adams, wife of Vice President and successor of Washington John Adams, noted, "Martha didn't feel her life was safe in their hands. Many of them supposed they wanted to get rid of her, so she was advised to release all of them at the end of the year." In other words, Martha feared her late husband's slaves would try to kill her, knowing that her husband's death meant their freedom. He said nothing about the slaves Martha bought to Mount Vernon when they were married. And in fact, those people were still in slavery when Martha died, as she divided them among her grandchildren. Facts about George Washington like these show that there is more to the eye when it comes to the famous founding father, both good and bad. What do you think? Comment down in the section below and don't forget to like and subscribe.